Hello and welcome. My name is Jaqueline. I'm representing Cyber Mulheres Europe, and I'm joined by Barbara. And we are incredibly excited to welcome our guest today, Jenniffer Hisle. We'll be diving into an important topic. It's AI security challenge in the financial industry. As is our customer here in Brazil, to ensure our content is accessible to everyone, I'll provide my audio description. I'm a brown-skinned woman with curly hair tied up, and I have a fringe, and I'm also wearing glasses and a white t-shirt featuring Cyber Mulheres logo. Now we are ready to introduce Jenniffer Hisle. Jenniffer is a result-driven leader at Wells Fargo with over 20 years of experience in cybersecurity, risk management, and technology governance. As an executive director and senior-led information security, her focus is on strengthening security infrastructure and driving risk mitigation. Her background in technology business services ensure a collaborative approach to bringing teams and aligning technical controls with business goals. I first met Jenniffer in an event in Atlanta City. Since then, daily, I've been thinking Jenniffer has too much to say. I need to bring her to talk with us in Brazil. So let's start. First of all, I ask Jenniffer if you can talk a little about yourself, and I also ask you for a brief audio description for accessibility. Tell us about how did you end up in this cybersecurity? Is that a love story?
Wonderful. And thank you all for asking me to join you today. I really appreciate that. And I'm very excited to be talking about, my past, but also AI security. It is part of everything I do these days. So I'm very excited to talk about governance in that space. A little bit about me. I have been in the overall technology industry for financial services for about 25 years. And I started off in a very interesting way. My degree is in industrial engineering and manufacturing engineering and operations research, also known as kind of the engineering of engineering, in which we're looking at how to make things better, looking at end-to-end processes, making sure that we're able to make something happen or make something happen better. I started off in my career, my professional career, with doing Kanban, process improvement, all of those types of things, and then got into call center leadership. From there, I started to learn that I needed more data. And that'll be a theme that will carry on to AI, but I needed more data to be able to make better decisions in my call center scheduling, all sorts of things that I was involved in there. So I worked with business intelligence, data design, making sure that I could actually get to the information I needed to make good decisions on staffing, on shifts, and be able to improve my performance or my team's performance. With that, I went back to school, got my MBA with an emphasis in IT. And so that's where I really got back into programming. I had taken some programming classes in high school and really enjoyed it. Also in college, really enjoyed it and really emphasized that in my MBA. So once I kind of got into that, I then started, when I was in the technology space, I then started really trying to understand, well, not understand, but starting to see challenges and problems in each one of our areas that I was interacting with. And I've been someone who has chased the problem, tried to understand the problem from a different perspective. I was actually working in data design and database management, and we were preparing for an audit. And there were all of these access permissions that we were trying to get rid of because they were unnecessary. And obviously, our auditors would say, that's overly permissive. We need to handle that. And so I was preparing for this audit and running through our controls and trying to get this access removed. Well, every time we would get a message back, they would say, okay, that's been removed. I would run the reports again and the access was back. So obviously there was some sort of breakdown in that process. And so where did I go next? Access management. Worked in access management for a while in application development, and we were building out an entirely new system. In building out that entirely new system, we were running into problems with our middleware setup, our infrastructure setup, our network setup, DNS, and having to meet with about 10 people to try and make this process work. In being able to make this process work and having all 10 of those people, it was very herding cats. If I don't know if that's a common term, but in the US we talk about herding cats, trying to bring all these people together that need to have this conversation together in this end-to-end communications traffic. And so the next space I went because of that frustration was infrastructure security. Um, and that's when I really started to get deep into security and understanding how we use DNS, how firewalls were interacting with our switches and routers, and really started to understand why we had all these disparate processes is because we needed to govern all of that very well. And now that brings me to today, and I'm in cybersecurity governance. And in cybersecurity governance, we take a look at a lot of things. We are trying to make sure that we have the appropriate policies and procedures that are meeting our laws, rules, regs, and authoritative sources in all the regions that we do business in as an international company. And then we're also trying to make sure that we're adhering to those things and that we know how to measure the adherence to all of those different laws, rules, regs, and meeting our authoritative resource or sources expectations, because those are going to be our regulators, right? Our regulators are going to say, what is the framework that you're tying back to? What are the controls you have in place to manage? How are you measuring your adherence to that? So that's the space that I'm in now. And do I love it? I would say absolutely. It's just been an interesting drive of mine to continue to move into the spaces that are, it seems, the most challenging. I feel like I bring a sense of learning, a sense of being able to connect the dots to today and tomorrow, being able to see that big picture and pulling the threads, while at the same time thinking about what risk does this bring to us as a bank. That's one of my underlying themes, is to what is the risk, and also is the cost worth the risk. I understand we need to do business. We're banks. We need to make money. We're publicly traded in the US here. And so because of that, we owe our shareholders, we owe the US public, we owe them the ability to know that we can grow responsibly and make sure that we are managing the highest risks that are. So that's a little bit about me, but I'm happy to take any additional questions you have.
Well, we are impressed. Such a broad experience. Wow. I guess Barbara wants to make some questions too about, as she also Cyber Mulheres, and she is also a cybersecurity professional in the financial sector. So I think she has something to ask here. Come on, Barbara.
Hi, Jennifer. My name is Barbara Cabral. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as
My
well.
Thank you. Jennifer, before my question, I will do my audio description. I'm a white woman. I have a blonde hair, and I wear the Cyber Mulheres group t-shirt. Well, my first question is, AI is changing social paradigms and is incredibly embedded in everything we do. How do you think the financial sector should approach this transformation?
In one word, carefully. That is one of the themes. I just went to FSISAC this past week, which is where I met Jacqueline last year. And the Fall Summit, the Fall America Summit, was just last week. It was very prevalent in all of the sessions that I attended. That could be because of the sessions I selected, but AI and it was a very hot topic. One thing to remember, though, is that AI isn't new, right? We've been using AI for a very long time, whether we know it or not. In predictive AI, we've been using that probably the longest. That started about 11 years ago. In predictive AI, those are the decisioning engines that we've been using for a while to say, if this, then that. We've automated our decisioning process so that it's editable, it's auditable, and all of those types of things. So we've been using predictive AI for a long time. What do we do with that? Well, we watch our models, right? We make sure that the models we're using, the rules we're using to predict what someone's credit worthiness is in the bank or what risk we're going to encounter. Those are all things that we're using and we've been using for a long time. Then, the second phase of that has been generative AI, which is a lot of the things that we've been kind of playing around with since 2022, since, right after the pandemic, and we were playing around on our laptops doing chat GPT, make me sound smarter, rewrite this email, organize my emails and summarize, those types of things. But it's been more generative, been more, it has been, learning on its own a little bit based on the information that we've provided it, the AI. Next, we're going to be getting into agentic, and that's kind of been around for about a year, but that's the really extensive, like research, building code, doing things that are new, and they're just talking to each other. So, if as we go out in the AI space and there is a bot of some sort that finds that something has broken, it's going to figure out where it broke, write the code, and then insert that code and update it. So as we get into that space, that's going to be a lot more challenging because it's not as transparent. It's very black box. It's very, I don't want to say scary. It can be scary in some ways if we don't know what we're putting into it. But all three of those types of AI are very, very data dependent. And so I believe the way that we need to approach it is to make sure that we have clean, very well tracked data lineage, understanding how that data is being used in many different ways, because that's how all of these models are going to learn, are going to predict, are going to provide answers to any of the questions that we ask it. The other thing is with Gen AI and agentic AI, we're getting a little bit more into that natural language processing, right? We are getting away from the if then, if this then that, very predictive coding in some of the bots that we wrote. And we're now getting into show me all the things I can do with AI and interpreting all of the things you've searched before, all of the data that you have available to you. It's going to create something completely new for you to build off of. And so we need to make sure that we have the human in the loop. We need to make sure that we are cleaning our data very well and that we understand our data very well. And we need to be very careful in not just doing AI for the sake of doing AI. Do it in the smart places that introduce less risk based on the information we have.
Great.
Thanks. You were right. It's not something new. We have talking about AI for decades. But since 2022, it's going so fast. It's increasingly being integrated in our daily lives. And now we have new risks about generative AI and a lot of new warnings we have to care. How do you balance the imperative for rapid digital transformation, such as migration to cloud migration, and AI, such as AI integrated tools, AI, with the need to maintain a robust and resilient cyber defense posture under a highly regulated environment as our financial sector?
That's especially true. And here in the US, our regulators are already asking questions. They're also going to boot camps with some of the folks that I met at FSISAC. They're going to boot camps to learn more themselves about what should they be asking, what should they be delving into, where should their questions be focused. Yeah, there was a gentleman from Palo Alto that really talked about some of the boot camps that he's been having for our regulators as of late in DC. So yeah, lots of questions are going to be coming and lots of attention paid to how are we using AI in our environments. So it's not just how we're protecting um, the AI agents that we're using, but it's how we're using AI in our environments. It can be very, very helpful and useful for things that we see lots of transactions, we see lots of interactivity on the internet from our customers. And so being able to process that information so much more quickly and make decisions and see trends and that kind of stuff, gosh, that's what AI is all about, is being able to help us in that space. However, the bad actors are also out there using it too, right? And so as quickly as we are stepping up, that quickness from the bad actors, the threat actors are also approaching us and trying to get in using, deep fakes, using voice fakes, using pictures, and posting from a reputational perspective. I mean, it really is so much out there. Now, getting into the cloud migration, AI migration, I think one of the keys, and I think we're going to get into it a little bit later when we talk a little bit about third parties, because very often we are using and relying upon third parties to provide this public cloud, even if we're having our own tenants in the cloud that we're owning and maintaining. There are parts of the cloud infrastructure, because it's infrastructure as a service, that are really run by the third parties, managed by the third parties. And our data is still ours and we still manage it, but we have to trust. And we have to trust our third parties in that space. I think the key in a lot of that is going to be back to what I was talking about before, which is transparency. Very, very important. We've got to be able to understand where is AI being used. We also need to understand how those AI models are being trained, what data it's using, what kind of access to data do those AI models have? So if we have a model that we're using from one of our cloud providers, is it using all of their data to train the model? And so might not be looking at a specific case that we're providing, or is it using our data? And then if it's using our data, how is that data being protected? So that's one of the things we've got to think about, is how is our data being protected, even if we want that AI model, to that large language model, to use our data to learn. How are we making sure that the data is clean, that we have the lineage, we know how it's being used, and we know how the model is making decisions? Those are some of the things that we really need to understand as we continue to use more and more vendor provided large language models, which almost all of us are doing. We're not building models from scratch very much at all, right? We're not building those large language models, especially. We may be using them and then training them on our data and making some tweaks in our prompt engineering, but we're not changing the models themselves. So in that, we need to understand, how is the model decisioning? How is it using data throughout the environment? So it's going to be very key to be able to gain that transparency in whatever environment you're processing your information in whatever data you're using, and as we go forward, for sure.
Very nice. As you said, we are the most difference we have from this new paradigm is that now we are really more dependent on the supply chain and third AI parties. Well, when we were in the paradigm of machine learning, the traditional one, predictive, we have all the control over the training set. We already had a lot of risk, but we had control of our set. And
Exactly.
now we can't control that. And so my question is to extend a little about this AI, third party, and supply chain risk. In your opinion, with the increasing reliance on external vendor and third party, what should be the key component of the security program to assess and monitor AI continually?
Yes, so that still gets back to your master service agreements, doing very good due diligence and demanding transparency. Especially as we get into AI, we have to know how exactly are the models trained to begin with, because we will train them again once we put our prompts, once we do our prompt engineering and once we work through our data. But we need to know and need to have that transparency on how the models were trained. Secondarily, we need to make sure that we understand when we are doing those, the technology analyses and assessments of those third parties, and doing the questionnaires and making sure that we understand what we're getting ourselves into with a third party in those agreements. We need to make sure that we have that transparency, and that we know what third and fourth, or what fourth and fifth and sixth parties they're utilizing, and what types of models they're utilizing as well, because 9 times out of 10, those providers that we're going to depend the most on, they're using AI that is provided by someone else as well. So I've seen a lot of cases recently where we're utilizing a particular vendor. So we've already got a vendor relationship, let's say with Google Cloud Platform. And we're utilizing GCP for our overall cloud environment. We're using various services for our different applications. And we're starting to slowly introduce some of the AI models and the API calls that are utilized in GCP. However, we're pulling in a vendor that also utilizes GCP and utilizes GCP models and large language models. So they're using Google as their fourth party. And so we need to understand that connectivity, because it's very common across all those parties. So just being very, very detailed in your due diligence in your third party contracts to understand you have to demand transparency as far as how those models are making decisions, and what those decisions are based on from a data perspective, understanding the data that they're trained on, and understanding how they protect your data and that they're not remembering your data. That's one of the things that comes out as you get into generative AI and agentic AI, is that they remember. And so if those models are remembering, you need to make sure that they're purged on a regular basis, and you need to ask about their data provenance and how the immutability is guaranteed, because otherwise they will get into that memorization of your data to use elsewhere. And I would just say in those third-party contracts, make sure that you have the ability to pool on site, to do your due diligence, to test, to do penetration testing on those models, on those APIs. That's going to be very critical. The APIs and the security controls that are in place. Whatever you're requiring your on-prem for your AI models and LLMs that you're pulling on-prem, make sure that you're using those same types of controls or asking for those same types of controls to be managed in that third-party space.
Nice. Well, as we are telling all the time, things are going too fast with AI. I want to ask you if, from your perspective, is the financial sector keeping pace with the security and development of AI, or are we still a long way to go? Are we still running?
Yeah. I think the industry as a whole, again, I'm gonna, steal a little bit from that gentleman at Palo that gave a very good talk earlier this week. Financial sector as a whole is a little bit, I wouldn't say we're behind, but the industry is moving faster than we're comfortable with, just being a highly regulated space. And so we need to get our handle on how many models we have running. That's one of the things, the inventory of the AI that we are using today in general. I don't think anyone has a handle on that. I don't think anyone has a very good handle on the inventory of what we're running today, whether it be predictive, generative, or agentic. The other thing is making sure that you understand, and this is the part that we in our company, we're getting ahead of right now, and I feel like we're on the cutting edge of this, potentially, given that we're working with a lot of cutting edge vendors, but is in identity management. Identities are handled very, very differently as you get into, right now with predictive, your bots, right? The RPA that we're running that is very predictive. We are able to trace it to a service account, and that service account does a thing. We log that thing, and then it provides an answer. As you get into generative, we still have a lot of those same things in place, but the access that is available to that account, in what it returns to the person who is using it, could be two very different things. So managing that access is going to be very important. And access management has always been the financial sector's, I would say, strong point, but also very precarious point. We manage access down to the nth degree as far as who has access to what, who has permissions to do a thing, because this is people's money. And so there are service accounts will very often have this very broad-based, I can see anything, so that I can process what I need to process and think and do all the things I need to. So you'll have your application IDs that have these very broad access permissions. But then the data that they're returning, it's not coming through an app necessarily. It's coming through an API that's presenting on an app. And so it may not, the person who's viewing it and asking and calling the API may not have those same permissions as that service account. So making sure that we're managing that, those tokens and the API tokens, and following that session all the way through as far as who's being presented with the data is going to be one of our biggest challenges. Is it any different necessarily than API tokens today? Maybe not so much, but are we as good with our API identity management as we could be? We're not as much right now because it's not being presented to an end user. It's being presented to the application to do a thing. So we're not as stringent, I think, in the financial sector, at least that I'm seeing, and what I heard this past week. We're not as good in our API security management, which is going to be a huge piece of agentic and generative AI are the API calls. And so being able to make sure that we are continuing those access permissions, those permissions down to the nth degree and those fine grain entitlements is going to be absolutely critical. And I think just knowing that and knowing the challenges, I think puts us a leg up on some of the industries today, to be honest with you. Knowing that we've been using models for a long time and we're very good at model risk management. We've had to report on model risk management for decades, as you said, right? We've had to report on how data is coming in, what kind of decisions it's making, and what's coming out, because we have to report on that. How did we make all of our credit worthiness decisions? Well, we're going to lay it out for you. That will maintain, and we know the risks that we're up against, and it's just being able to fit those risks into this evolving technology and making sure that we're hitting those high points once again.
Yeah, so bring for us a lot of points of care, points of attention, as since we have a warning about ethics, biases, toxicity, and we also have to care about the shadow AI, as you said. Was first we are worried about shadow IT only, and now we have a new shadow for us. We had the shadow AI when we need to care about what our staff tools are being used, how they use, what they use. And we have a concern on wariness, but also in data loss prevention. So AI is like we need many hands to manage it, and all they are very important. All them. And now we are interested on change a little our subject to talk about diversity. I know Barbara have a question here, so please, Barbara.
Given your background and focus on diversity, what specific actions have you led to build a more diverse and inclusive team? And how do you measure the impact of those efforts in your team's performance innovation?
Wow, that's a great question. I've been really blessed from a women's perspective. I've had some great role models in the cybersecurity space, the security infrastructure space. In that, two of the ladies that I've worked with here at Wells Fargo are now CISOs of their own major financial institutions. So I'm really blessed in that perspective. And I think that they've imbued a really good perspective in understanding that there's all sorts of views and backgrounds that need to be heard in the cybersecurity space. And I'm not just talking from a physical diversity perspective. Yes, I just spoke about women leaders and women CISOs, which like I said, I'm so blessed to have those very, very smart women in my corner. But also from the perspective of how folks approach things differently. Different approaches are so critical in being able to solve a problem. I know that I have a very broad background in technology, in process, and in leadership. However, I don't have necessarily as deep as some folks are going to have in some of the security areas. I know that. I've studied for my CISSP, and I know that there's folks that have much more depth in all of the areas that I'm familiar with and that I can speak to. And so being able to recognize those that bring those types of skills to the table and that you can depend on to bounce ideas off of are very, very important, just as important as those folks that will step in and lead a conversation on a particular topic and get stuff done. And so bringing those types of people together is very important to me. And that's what I've really concentrated on in my career. Whether, regardless of the background of that person, the skin color, the um, sex assigned at birth, any of those things, I really have tried to build my teams based on knowledge and based on how they approach problem thinking, or I'm sorry, problem solving and thinking through issues. I will have different folks on my team that will just feel more comfortable during a meeting IMing their ideas. As we're having a very lively conversation, and I'm I call myself an extroverted introvert in that I will carry a room, I will lead a conversation, I will pull people in, but I'll also be very respectful of the things that are popping up in my IM during that conversation as well, and bring that information into the conversation. It brings that different perspective, that different thought process, and you have very, very smart people that are just not as comfortable stepping into the foray and stepping into the fire in a conversation that can be really exciting and very fast paced. So I've seen us be able to address some very meaty topics in that space, especially one of them being right now. We are building out a Cyber for AI governance team, and it is very new. We've been handling our AI security in a lot of different of our cyber domains, and we want to bring it all together and make sure that we're governing it well across all of our AI. Again, that gets back into understanding our inventory, all of the things that we have to have in place. But what we've been able to put together is an interesting team based on two very deep technologists that go so deep into the weeds when it comes to the different patterns and the security controls and the use cases and how the LLMs are being used and trained. And then we've got folks that are very familiar with the risks presented and delving into the authoritative sources. And well, EU AI Act says this, and then we have 38 states that have put some things on the books regarding AI, and making sure that we're pulling all those pieces together, as well as the folks that can present these really difficult topics in an executive type format. And so being able to bring all those people together has enabled us to really hit the ground running when it comes to building out an AI or a Cyber for AI governance program.
Well, Jennifer, I'm a little sad because we are already in the last question. I think we should be talking all day long.
I
It's so
know
incredible. You are
it's
great.
such
Thank
great
you so
topics, such great
much.
topics, and so top of mind for sure.
So my last question is about a reflection. And nowadays, many researchers has considered that AI is becoming invisible. This concept come from the so deeply embedded in our daily routine that most of people start to consume it daily without even notice it individually. So it has such a power of changing human habits, customers. My question is about your opinion. Are the new ethical guidelines, regulations about around the responsible AI, such as the European AI Act, for instance, generally moving us toward a greater accountability for addressing the systemic bias and prevention humanization, or aren't we still so far?
I think we're not as far as we need to be, quite honestly. And the challenge goes back to the data. I'm going to bring that up yet again, is that systematically, the data historically and systematically, the data that we're using to train our models is inherently biased because of the rights and the privileges that have not been even and not been equal across all races and sexes across history. And very, I mean, I call it recent history. Anything that's happened in less than 100 years, for all intents and purposes, is recent history. And we're using, I mean, even what was it, as late as the 80s, that women, at least this is in the United States, were not allowed to have credit cards without their husband co-signing on them. Okay, so think back to that. Also, in technology and especially in cybersecurity, it's been a very male-dominated world. So even in our hiring decisions, so I'm going to go down two different routes, is that in our credit worthiness decisioning, if we're going to say, hi, here's all the data that shows us what a good credit worthy individual looks like, and we just open it up and say, here's all the data on this credit worthy A1A person, number one person that we want to give credit to all the time, they're going to be predominantly white, they're going to be predominantly male. That's just because that's what the data tells us, because that's where the data is biased naturally. Same with hiring decisions. If you say, give me a picture of the most successful CISOs over the last 20 years, they're all going to reflect back to say those are predominantly male, just because, and white male, to be even more specific, because those are who are living in those roles in the past 20 years. Things are changing. We are progressing. We are seeing, high credit worthiness in women and people of color. We are seeing very good candidates and super CISOs, gonna do that plug again, in females and in people of color. So with the new data, how do we bias that data towards more recent? Is there a way to bias that data towards the current demographic and the current in our industry overall, in financial services and in cybersecurity? I think that's where our challenge is going to be, in understanding how to build models that will help us, that we won't even think about in our hiring decisions and all of that, is to not key in on words that say, I went to a specific school, because the schools could be very different, especially if you're looking at schools for people of color or schools for women that are highly respected. So, thinking about those types of things and where people live, where people were born, like looking at all of those things are going to be factors that might bias us in a bad way, not in a bad way, but in a way we don't want it to. And that's why human in the loop is going to be critical for this. Feedback is going to be critical. Training and retraining on the appropriate data is going to be critical, because soon it will become, we don't even think about it. That we don't even consider whether the answer you're getting back is right or wrong, or that the bias is inherent in the data. We may not have thought that if we pull what the profile is of a successful CISO, that is going to bias us towards white men, then we've not done our due diligence on understanding our data. So that's going to be critical. Yeah, it goes back to the same themes, I guess you could say.
Well, when you are talking about human in loop, I just think here we really need AI, but AI still need us to be better, so it can bring it together, and human must be more give more attention to this, and we need to really work together to go to trustworthy AI, and also to to win this challenge of the biases as well as we are here, human women. So thank you so much for being here. I'm really happy and proud. And now we need
Good.
to end this.
Thank you
Yes,
so
Jennifer.
much. Yeah, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt, but I just wanted to thank you both so much and thank your entire organization. It was wonderful meeting you, Jacqueline, last year, and I think that we continuing to go to these networking seminars and summits and organizational get-togethers is so important because none of this is new or different for any of us. And so being able to listen to peers and the experiences that they're having is so important.
Yes. Uh, Thank you so much, Jennifer. It's a pleasure have you with us for this October, no? The awareness month, cybersecurity celebration. Um, I hope to see you the next opportunity in
Yes,
the
let's all
next.
meet at the next FSI SAC. Definitely. Thank you so much.